In this video we're going to look at stakeholder theory. Now there are other videos on the course on this topic and it's worthwhile looking at those as well. But in the context of this one we want to run across various ideas associated with stakeholder theory. Now the theory centres on the issues concerning the stakeholders in an institution. And right at the outset, before we get into the various slides on this course, it's worth just briefly running across types of stakeholders. We can imagine the shareholders being a stakeholder because clearly they're interested in the business because they are the owners of the business. So the shareholders are a stakeholder. But so also are the managers within the business. In fact, so also are the senior managers, the middle managers, the departmental managers, the line managers. So also are the shop floor staff, the office staff, as indeed are the suppliers of the raw materials, the agencies who work for the business, for example marketing agencies, will be stakeholders, as indeed is the community. Companies exist within the community and the community has an interest in the business. So in fact, stakeholders could be defined as anyone who's got an interest in the business, a particular interest in the business. And we'll see how this works out as we work our way through this video. Stakeholder theory, it seeks to provide a balance between the interests of its diverse stakeholders in order to ensure that each one receives some degree of satisfaction. Now, that's an idea that goes back a long way, back to 1951. But the idea is that the various stakeholders should receive some sort of satisfaction. They should be engaged in some way with the business and they should receive a return from the existence of the business. So the workers should receive remuneration, job security. But in return, the workers have an obligation to involve themselves and be committed towards the business and the objectives of the business. The managers have an obligation to ensure that the business is run efficiently. And in return, they can expect good remuneration and good conditions of employment. The shareholders are stakeholders. If the business requires additional funding, the shareholders may want to invest further in the business. So we can see that the various stakeholders receive benefits, but they also put something back into the business. There is an argument that agency theory is narrow because it identifies the shareholders as the only interest group of a corporate entity. Now, agency theory is also the subject matter of separate videos on the course. But agency theory essentially looks at almost a dichotomy, almost a split between the owners of the business, which we call the principals, and the managers of the business, the agents. And it's called agency theory. It's the principals and the agents. And the principals want security of investment. The shareholders want security of investment. They want good return on their investment. That's why they invested in the business in the first place. But the agents, the managers in other words, the managers want good remuneration, good conditions of employment, job security. They want perks, they want bonuses, and the more the managers take, of course, the less there's available for the shareholders. So there is a conflict. And that ushers in a new area, or a relatively new area, into our consideration, that of corporate governance, which again is the subject matter of separate videos on the course. So, agency theory it places a lot of emphasis, I should say, on shareholders, whereas stakeholder theory is much wider. It recognizes shareholders, but it also recognizes the various other participants in the corporate activity that I mentioned right at the start, the the workers, the managers, the suppliers of raw materials, the community. All of these are also stakeholders. So it's much wider than agency theory. However, the stakeholder theory is better in explaining the role of corporate governance than agency theory by highlighting different types of stakeholder. And that's the idea. So stakeholder theory looks at all of the various stakeholders. Agency theory is really only concerned between the split between the principals and the agents, the owners of the business and the managers of the business, and looks at why there is a split and what are the issues between them. Stakeholder theory is much wider. With an original view of the firm, the shareholder is the only one recognized by business law in most countries because they are the owners of the companies. So when companies are formed, they're formed by the owners of the business. And when people buy shares in a business, they buy part of the ownership of the business. And most countries recognize ownership and recognize the shareholders as the most important element. However, there is increasing recognition of the importance of other stakeholders within the business, recognizing the importance of the managers, recognizing the importance of the workers, and workers' rights and the obligations of management and the business towards workers and towards conditions of employment and all sorts of issues are starting to look into the rights of the various stakeholders. So companies can't pollute the environment because they impinge upon the rights of the stakeholders, the local community in that case. So there is a movement almost that widens the original principal-agent issue, agency theory, out to look at these various other stakeholders and look at their rights and indeed their obligations also. The firm has a fiduciary duty to maximize their returns and put their interests first. So the company has an obligation to maximize their returns. The company must try to be efficient, but also recognize the role and status of the various stakeholders in the organization. So the managers must work, in a sense, not so much for themselves directly, but for the business. And in so doing, create the resources to satisfy the competing demands of the various stakeholders. Stakeholders that demand that the company does not pollute, it cleans up the mess it may make, it does not pollute water or air, it doesn't create noise. That's for the local community. It rewards the managers and the workers with good remuneration, security of employment, good working conditions. It also rewards the owners with returns on their investment. So there's a whole range of competing demands, and the managers have a fiduciary commitment to try and maximize the returns of the business to meet these various demands. In more recent business models, the institution converts the inputs of investors, employees and suppliers into forms that are saleable to customers, hence returns back to the shareholders. So we can now start to see the institution, start to see the business as converting inputs, various inputs, into saleable forms that go to customers. And the customers benefit from receiving the products of the organization. Customers benefit by receiving the products, by having something to buy that satisfies a need that they've got. But the organisation has also got a need to generate the revenue to satisfy the needs of the employees, of the investors, and also of the shareholders. So the model tries to address the needs of investors, employers, suppliers, and customers. It's trying to get a reconciliation of these various competing requirements so that the organisation is able to continue and resolve any conflict between them. Clearly, if one set of stakeholders are not satisfied with the returns they're getting, they're going to be upset, they're going to campaign against the business, there's going to be conflict. So to resolve the issue, the management must ensure that the business is producing sufficient resources to satisfy the various competing stakeholder requirements. Therefore, stakeholder theory argues that the parties involved should include governmental bodies, political groups, trade associations, trade unions, communities, associated corporations, prospective employees, and the general public. So we could take a very wide view of stakeholder theory to include all of these extra interested parties. Not all of them might want to participate. Maybe the government bodies don't want to participate because they don't see that as part of their remit. Political groups may not want to participate. It's not necessarily in their interest to be seen to be working closely with any particular organisation, perhaps. Trade associations might, trade unions might welcome the opportunity to be more involved in businesses. Communities might want to be involved to ensure that the business is run properly and ethically, and it recognises its role within the community. But so stakeholder theory can be very wide. That's the point. In some scenarios, competitors and prospective clients can be regarded as stakeholders to help improve business efficiency in the marketplace. Now that's perhaps carrying it a little too far, but some writers do suggest that perhaps the competitors can also be seen as stakeholders. It may be possible to conceive of this if we believe that the competitors are pushing the organisation to be more efficient and to innovate the product and thereby create more customer satisfaction and more efficient ways of producing the product. So in that sense, the competitors are a good influence on the business. They're pushing the business to be more efficient, to be more productive, to be more innovative. And that therefore could mean that we see the competitors as a type of stakeholder. I say it's pushing it too far because they're not, in a sense, institutionalized stakeholders. They're not perhaps recognized by the business as stakeholders, but they are certainly an influence on the business. The competitor environment is an interest on the business, and it is pushing the business to become more competitive and more innovative. Stakeholder theory has become more prominent because many researchers have recognized that the activities of a corporate entity impact on the external environment, requiring accountability of the organization to a wider audience than simply its shareholders. So we now recognize that companies don't simply report to the shareholders. Agency theory is perhaps too focused, too narrow. The principal agent problem is very narrow. It looks at the split between management and owners, principals and agents. But perhaps looking at organizations as entities within the community entities that create employment, entities that have relationships with other entities in terms of the supply of raw materials, the distribution of goods and so on. There are linkages between all of these. And as long as there are linkages, there are commitments and obligations. And that's what leads to this wider view of stakeholder theory. For instance, MacDonald and Puxley in 1979 proposed that companies are no longer the instruments of shareholders alone, but exist within society and therefore has a responsibility to that society. Well, if we think about it, companies do exist within society, and companies only exist within society because the society agreed to have them. On the other hand, there's mutual benefits here. The companies exist to make a profit, to produce products. But the companies in so doing provide products for customers that satisfy customers' requirements. But they also create employment and prosperity. So there's a mutuality here that both sides benefit, but both sides are involved, and therefore there is an interrelationship and, if you like, a stakeholder linkage between the local community and the business. Economic value is created by people who voluntarily come together and cooperate to improve everyone's position. Well, that's the nature of the market. The market simply comes into existence. It's what economists call a spontaneous institution. It just derives because someone perceives the need. An entrepreneur perceives a need, a niche, a gap in the market, and then commences to produce to satisfy that niche. Perhaps the motivation for the entrepreneur is profits, or it could be self-satisfaction or interest or philanthropy. It's trying to help someone. It could be a social entrepreneur who's trying to simply improve the community or improve the condition of some people. But stakeholder theory, I think, starts with this idea of economic value created by people who voluntarily come together to cooperate to improve everyone's position. Jensen critiques the stakeholder theory for assuming a single valued objective, gains that accrue to a firm's constituency. Now, the firm's constituency here is the set of stakeholders. That's the firm's constituency. The firm's constituency is composed of the customers. The firm has to recognize those, the workers, the local community, the suppliers of raw materials, the various agents that the company may engage as a part of their production process. So it's assuming a single valued objective, gains that accrue to a firm's constituency. It suggests that the performance of a firm is not and should not be measured by gains to its stakeholders. So there are all sorts of debates here as to what is it that the business should be doing. Should it be satisfying all of its stakeholders, or should it be perhaps just making profits and keeping its head down? Perhaps satisfying its immediate stakeholders in the form of satisfying its managers and its workers, and ensuring that it pays its debts to its suppliers and to the agents that it employs. Or should it have this wider commitment that we're talking about? Other key issues, such as flow of information from senior management to lower ranks, interpersonal relations, working environment, etc., are all critical issues that should be considered. When we think of stakeholder theory, there's all sorts of linkages we can think of, and the flow of information is one of them. Stakeholders should be informed about what the business is doing and how well it's doing, and what are the issues it's confronting, and how is it dealing with these. However, there's another side to this argument, and that is the one that requires the organization to have commercial secrecy. It doesn't want its competitors to know it's having particular problems, perhaps. It doesn't want its competitors to know what its plans for investments are, or what its current line of research is. So when we talk about flows of information from senior management to lower ranks, presumably we mean very filtered information, information that is that can flow without endangering the survival of the business. Because if it gets into the wrong hands, if it gets into the hands of competitors, it could be used against the business. So some of these other issues provided a platform for other arguments. So there are many views of stakeholder theory and what stakeholder theory should be doing. An extension of the theory called an enlightened stakeholder theory was proposed, for example. However, problems relating to empirical testing of the extension have limited its relevance. Enlightened stakeholder theory is a very open stakeholder theory that suggests that the various stakeholders can be trusted and relied upon and to work in the best interest of the organization, but it could endanger the organization, as I said earlier, because information is leaked out to the competitors or to competitors overseas who will then set up in competition against the business, and that would not be welcomed. So testing various relationships that may be ironed out or suggested in the context of stakeholder theory is very difficult. So what we do instead is simply list out various possibilities, discuss them, and understand that there's the possibility of these relationships existing. The relationship between the business and the local community, the business and the employees, the business and the trade unions, the business and the shareholders. And what sort of relationships have they got, and what influences the quality of that relationship. In order to differentiate amongst stakeholder types, Rodriguez and et al. And his colleagues classified different classification was adopted, that of consubstantial, contractual and contextual stakeholders. So here was an effort at trying to group various stakeholders under various headings to try and make more sense of it. And here the consubstantial, the contractual and the contextual stakeholders were, this idea of these different categories was born. Well, the consubstantial stakeholders are the stakeholders that are essential for the business's existence. Stakeholders and investors, strategic partners, employees. These are the absolutely vital stakeholders. These are the ones that must be dealt with. And as I mentioned earlier, these may be isolated out as particularly important stakeholders, ones that get first preference in terms of the attention of management. Because without these, there won't be a business. The contractual stakeholders, as their name indicates, have some kind of a formal contract with the business. They're contractual. Financial institutions, suppliers, subcontractors, customers. There's a contractual relationship. The stakeholders, they are in a relationship with the business. It's contractual. The business employ them from time to time or has some sort of working relationship with them. Customers may have a contractual relationship with the business. The customers expect the product to be good quality, to give value for money, and if it doesn't, they have rights that may mean that they come back and and ask for a refund. So there are contractual relationships between the stakeholders. Not as pressing as the first one. The first one is extremely important for the existence of the business. The contractual ones are ones that can be dealt with by the business and the business may run. Contextual stakeholders are representatives of the social and natural systems in which the business operates and play a fundamental role in obtaining business credibility and ultimately the acceptance of their activities. So these are representatives of the social and natural systems. The business must operate within communities and must operate with the approval of the communities. And it must have an enhanced reputation within that community for its long-term survival. Otherwise, it's going to be under constant pressure from the outside agencies, constant criticism perhaps, and it will have to dissipate resources in trying to deal with issues. So having a good working relationship with the wider community is important. And that's the context within which the business operates. And the contextual stakeholders are the representatives of the community. And they play an important part in ensuring smooth operation of the business, continuance of the business in the area, and a good reputation for the business within that area. Rodriguez et al. Argue that the company has to safeguard the interest of all who contribute to the general value creation, that is, make specific investment to a given corporation. So the company has to safeguard the interests of all who contribute. They must recognize all who contribute. They may categorize them in the way we've just talked about, but they must recognize who is it that is making a contribution to the success of the business. In a sense, almost just make a list of names. Who are these people? What contribution do they make? And then recognize that they are important for the business. Clearly, some will be internal and some will be external, but they've all got linkages with the business. So it's important to recognize them. These firm-specific investments can be diverse and include physical, human, and social capital. So firm-specific investments means that the business can make investments in the community. There could be perhaps the provision of recreation equipment or provision of facilities or just having a nice tidy environment within the community. It could be that they invest in people and reward people who make an investment in themselves through educational attainment or through skill acquisition. Or it could be in, as I said, social capital, looking after the environment and showing responsibility within the community. So we could have internal, the employees, the managers. We could have external, the suppliers of raw materials and the agents that work for the business. And we could have, if you like, super external, the community. And the linkage between the business and the community may seem tenuous, but it is there. The business exists within the community and has an obligation to behave properly within the community. The Rodriguez model may be looked at in the context of that diagram. But essentially, providing we understand what is meant by consubstantial, contextual and contractual, I think that diagram is covered. So that's our discussion of stakeholder theory. It's probably best to view the other videos on stakeholder theory on the course also to get a wider perspective and to run those other videos alongside this one. But it's a very important topic, and one that needs thorough consideration. But that's all we're going to deal with here, so let's leave it at that and say thank you for watching.